Hey everybody, Aaron Rift here from NoDQ.com, and this is a special edition of WCW Wednesday. Today I will be talking about WCW's Clash of the Champions, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I had a chance to go through all the Clash of the Champions, which are now available every single episode from number 1 through 35 on the WWE Network. So go to WWE.com if you haven't already and sign up today for $9.99. But anyways, enough of that. It is a great service. WWE Network is awesome, and it was a lot of fun to watch these Clash of the Champions events again. Some of them I saw when they first aired. Some of them I've only seen parts of. So I figured I would go through the Clash of the Champions here real quick and give my recommendations, some of the most memorable matches and segments. First off, we'll start with the very first Clash from 1998, going up against WrestleMania 4. The obvious match here that you should check out is Ric Flair versus Sting. I'm sure most of you, if not everybody watching this, has seen that match at some point. It was the match that put Sting's career on the map. Prior to that match, he was just your typical babyface, wasn't really a big star, but once he got in there with Ric Flair, he became a superstar. So if you haven't seen that match, go check it out right now. Start off with that. Next up, from the 5th Clash of the Champions in February 1989, the build-up to the Ric Flair versus Ricky Steamboat match at the Chi-Town Rumble that year. They had an interview segment with Ric Flair decked out in fancy clothes with the women, and then you had Ricky Steamboat come out. He was representing the family values, and it turned into a brawl. Ricky Steamboat ripped up Ric Flair's clothes, and I always thought that this was an awesome angle to build up their match, and I liked the whole dynamic of Flair being the rich playboy and Steamboat being the traditional family man. I really enjoyed the storyline, and this was an awesome segment, so check that one out. And next up, speaking of Flair and Steamboat, Ric Flair versus Ricky Steamboat from Clash of the Champions 6. This was a 2 out of 3 falls match, and it went almost an hour. Steamboat won the 2 out of 3 falls match, but it was controversial. Ric Flair had his foot under the bottom rope, which gave him another rematch, and he would go on to win back the title. But this is another match you definitely have to check out. It's been released on several WWE DVD releases, so you more than likely have seen this one, but it's always worth checking out again if you got the time, because it's a very long match. And moving on here from Clash of the Champions 7. I really enjoyed this Clash in general just because of the atmosphere. It took place at Fort Bragg in North Carolina, and it was a very rowdy crowd, very ECW-esque crowd before there was ECW. It was just a very interesting show based on the crowd alone. And you had Ricky Steamboat versus Terry Funk. And, Terry Funk was just terrific during this time in WCW, from when he attacked Ric Flair when Flair won the title. And then throughout 1989, Terry Funk was just on a roll during this time in WCW. So you make sure you check out Ricky Steamboat versus Terry Funk. That was just a very entertaining match with Funk in there. And next, we have the Clash of the Champions 9, which is the I Quit match, Ric Flair versus Terry Funk. One of the best matches of the 1980s. I mean, this was just an incredible match. Terry Funk, like I said, was at the top of his game. Ric Flair at the top of his game. Another match you've probably seen. Most of you, I'm sure, have seen it. But it's another match you definitely need to check out if you haven't. Next up, we have from Clash of the Champions 10, the Four Horsemen turning on Sting. This was a big storyline. Sting had won this tournament or whatever at Starrcade and was the number 1 contender or whatever for Ric Flair's title. And it looked like Sting was going to be joining the Horsemen. He was an ally with Ric Flair, but then they turned their back on him because he's going to possibly get a title shot. And unfortunately for Sting, he got injured at the end of the show and would be out of action until the Great American Bash later that year. So in terms of storyline and historical significance, this was an important clash to watch with the Horseman turning on Sting, and then the angle at the end was Sting getting hurt. Next up, from Clash of the Champions 11, this is just something noteworthy I wanted to mention. The Master Blasters and Kevin Nash. I just thought it was interesting watching this to see Kevin Nash very early in his wrestling career in WCW, and this was pre-Oz, so that just goes to show you how far back this went. So that's just something interesting, noteworthy to check out on the network. This was in September 1990 at Clash 11. Moving on here from Clash 14, the return of Dusty Rhodes. This was right after Dusty Rhodes ended his run in WWE, literally like a week or so. I mean, he was at the Royal Rumble, and then a week or two later, he was here on the Clash show, and this was his comeback. He did the announcing, and he was booking again for WCW. So that was something noteworthy in the history of WCW in general. Moving on to the Clash 15. Interesting to note that this was Steve Austin's first Clash of the Champions and his first major big-time appearance in WCW. So, it's interesting to see how his character evolved from when he first came in. And, this was the start of Steve Austin's run, in the big time in a major league. So, check that out for Steve Austin. And definitely most people watching this, huge fans of Steve Austin, that is something you want to see. And next up, Clash of the Champions 17. One of my all-time favorite Clash of the Champions. An awesome storyline here, in my opinion, where you had these mystery boxes that were being sent to Sting, and we finally got the payoff here. It was Lex Luger who was sending these guys, Cactus Jack and Abdullah the Butcher, to take out Sting, and Sting ended up getting injured here in the storyline. And he was at the hospital, and he was scheduled for a U.S. title match with Rick Rude, who had just come into WCW. And it looked like Sting was not going to make it, but then at the hospital, you hear Sting. He leaves the hospital. He comes back to the arena. He insists on competing in the title match, and unfortunately, Rick Rude is able to take advantage of the injury, and he wins the U.S. title. I just thought that this was a tremendous storyline. It was a show-long storyline, so it was very entertaining television from start to finish. And also another noteworthy thing about this clash is Ricky Steamboat's return to WCW, him and Dustin Rhodes capturing the tag team titles. So check that one out. Awesome Clash of the Champions. And they had a little streak here, because I also enjoyed the following clash after that, which was in January 1992, Clash 18. You had a lot of star power here. You had an awesome six-man match here. Dustin Rhodes, Barry Windham, and Ron Simmons against the Dangerous Alliance. Dangerous Alliance, an awesome stable of the early 1990s. So check that match out. And then the main event was Sting and Ricky Steamboat against Steve Austin and Rick Rude. Like I said, lots of star power, and it's just so much fun to watch all these guys. And, Steve Austin wasn't Stone Cold yet, but it was just interesting to see him earlier in his career interacting with Sting and Rick Rude and Ricky Steamboat. And also this clash was the debut of Jesse the Body Ventura in WCW as well. Clash of the Champions 20. This was the 20th clash, and was also, I think it was the 20th anniversary or 25th anniversary, something of WCW and NWA wrestling on TBS. So, you had Andre the Giant there, and this was his last U.S. television appearance. And you had a really interesting match here. You had a big single elimination tag team match, and lots of star power in this one. Rick Rude, Jake Roberts, Super Invader, a.k.a. Hercules, and Big Van Vader against Sting, Nikita Koloff, and the Steiner brothers. So, check that one out. That was another interesting match with all those people in there. And just how that played out was interesting. And I think that was Jake Roberts' only Clash of the Champions appearance as well. And later that year, November 1992, you had Clash 21, Ricky Steamboat and Shane Douglas against Barry Windham and Dustin Rhodes. And this was the match where Barry Windham turned heel on Dusty Rhodes. And I thought that this was a tremendous angle, great heel turn by Barry Windham. And this show also had Medusa versus Paul E., which is noteworthy because it was Paul E.'s last major appearance in WCW, and he would go on to a little company called Eastern Championship Wrestling, and the rest would be history there. So that was interesting to see that. And Clash of the Champions 23 in June 1993. Ric Flair's big in-ring return to WCW. He had been back for a couple months, but this was his big in-ring comeback. Him and Arn Anderson against the Hollywood Blondes. Another match you've probably seen before because it's been on several WWE DVD releases, including the Clash of the Champions DVD set, and a lot of these matches have been on there. But, you know, that's another match that is one you can watch over and over again. Very entertaining. And next up from Clash 24, the shocking debut of the Shockmaster. Not a great moment, you know, under normal circumstances, but it is what it is. Perhaps the most infamous wrestling debut of all time, and you can watch it in its entirety during Clash 24 in, I believe it was August 93. Clash 25, the Hollywood Blondes exploding. Steve Austin versus Brian Pillman. Very good match. Not as long as you would have liked it to have been, but still a very good match between these two. And it's too bad they could have headlined a pay-per-view, these two guys, but you know they were here on the Clash, and they still went out there and had a really good match. And I believe it's the only one-on-one match that I can recall on a high-profile WCW event, like either a pay-per-view or a Clash of the Champions. So definitely check that one out. And in January 1994, you had Clash 26. Bobby the Brain Heenan made his WCW debut on this show, so that's something that's very noteworthy. And you had a very good main event, Sting and Ric Flair against Vader and Rick Rude. Ric Flair did an awesome injury angle here with Vader, and Sting ended up defeating Rick Rude to win the match. And Vader even dropped an S-bomb during this. So, I mean, that was entertaining as well. Vader just being unpredictable. Great stuff here. And moving on to June 94, a very significant Clash of the Champions, the unification match, Sting and Ric Flair. Flair was the WCW champion, Sting was the international champion. And this was also Hulk Hogan's live debut in WCW at the Clash, and he got booed out of the building there. We're in South Carolina, Ric Flair country. So this was just, you know, very entertaining to see how the crowd reacted to Hulk Hogan. Didn't exactly go the way I'm sure Hogan was hoping for. But nonetheless, Flair and Sting, these guys never have a bad match. Very historical, significant match. Historically significant. You had Sensational Sherry, or should I say Sensuous Sherry, to avoid WWE lawsuit. She came out and joined up with Ric Flair, and you know, this was the big setup to Hogan versus Flair at Bash at the Beach. And moving on here, Clash 28 in August 1994. Ricky Steamboat beat Steve Austin to win the U.S. title, and you know, this was a significant match, very good match, and also it was one of Ricky Steamboat's last matches. So essentially, this was a last hurrah for him before he had his career-ending injury. And him and Steve Austin tore the house down. And, you know, Steve Austin, you could really see how good he was getting. And he was well on his way to being a major star in the industry until he started feuding with Jim Duggan. And then it all went downhill for him. But that's a totally different topic. And next here, the Clash 29. One noteworthy match that I enjoyed that is a bit of an underrated match, in my opinion, is Vader versus Dustin Rhodes. I thought that this was a really good match between these two. And they would shortly go on to WWE. But here they actually had a really good match during a time when you didn't have a lot of good wrestling in WCW. You had, you know, the Butcher, a.k.a. Brutus Beefcake. You had Avalanche. You had Jim Duggan. You didn't really have a very good undercard. But Vader and Dustin went out there and it had a really good match on a show that was otherwise not too good wrestling-wise. And moving on a little bit down the line, Clash 32. This was in Las Vegas, January 1996. You know, you had this big wedding with Sherry and Colonel Parker, which was entertaining. And then you had the main event here. Not anything really good wrestling-wise, but very significant because it was the return of Miss Elizabeth to the professional wrestling world. and you had Kevin Green on this show in his first big WCW appearance, and he would make several more. So a few interesting things about this show. And moving on, the Clash 33. This was significant because this was the first Clash following the formation of the NWO. And you had Hulk Hogan versus Ric Flair, which is not anything all that out of the ordinary at this point, except for the fact that the roles were reversed for the first time. You had Hulk Hogan as the heel and Ric Flair as the babyface. And next up, in January '97, the next to last Clash. The only noteworthy thing about this, I think, was one of the undercard matches, which was Dean Malenko versus Ultimo Dragon. Really good match that you should definitely check out. And this was during a period when WCW's main events weren't so good, but the undercards were usually excellent. And this was a match that really stood out at the time, and easily the best match on this Clash. So check that one out. And finally, the final Clash. Once again, a very solid undercard. The most noteworthy thing about this show was the NWO. This was their birthday celebration, and they had a cake and everything. But then you had the boy's voice. You had the lights go out, you had the sirens in the background, and you had the boy deliver the big speech about Sting, and you had Sting in the rafters. And this was just a big moment for Sting. The debut of his new music, the Dark Sting. His character really took a whole new turn at this Clash, and his mission was clear. He was on a mission of justice to take out the NWO once and for all. So there you have it. My thoughts on the Clash of the Champion events. Lots of quality matches, memorable moments. Check them out on the WWE Network, and stay tuned to NoDQ.com for the very latest in the world of WWE and TNA.